joining us this morning at this session with Mark Neithercut. I've known Mark, for the 16 years that I've been involved with nonprofits now. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mark to all of you. Many of you know Mark is the president of Neithercut Philanthropy Advisors, and in which Mark leads a team of professionals that handle philanthropic affairs for a select group of families and advisors, and advises foundations on how to engage in effective and rewarding philanthropy. The firm has completed recent projects for the Michigan Endowment Health Fund, Saul and Jean Mintz Foundation, William Davidson Foundation, the Prey Foundation, and the Max M. and Marjorie S. Fisher Foundation, to name a few. Their mission is to develop their mission statements and grant-making strategies, help new trustees or executives manage their new philanthropic role, and to improve administrative options. Mark is a graduate of the University of Michigan and earned a PhD from the University of British Columbia. I know you will enjoy his presentation today, so please help me welcome Mark Neithercut.
Thanks very much, Denise, and see you.
I'll be back.
This is a funny layout to the room. I feel like I need to stand here part of the time and over here part of the time. So anyway, welcome everybody. Great to see you all. Appreciate you showing up, especially for a session that might be slightly off-center for the conference today. So appreciate you showing up. So before we get started, let's just do a quick little hand raising. Interested to know the nature of the group we've got here today. So let's just say, how many of you would identify in the advancement development field? Raise your hand, please. Okay, that's good. And how many of you would identify as being a professional advisor to foundations, attorneys, accountants, insurance, whatever? Okay, good. And how many of you would identify being at a foundation, staff member, trustee, donor, that sort of thing to a foundation? Okay, good. So before we get started, let me tell you a little story. I want to tell you a story about a college professor's foundation. So imagine that you're a yoga instructor in Phoenix, Arizona. Might be a bit of a stretch, but bear with me. So imagine you're a yoga instructor, a male yoga instructor in Phoenix, Arizona. And imagine that your father is a college professor at Indiana University, a very famous college professor who invented something. He's an engineering professor, invented something that you don't really quite understand. It's something to do with guidance systems, missiles maybe, you're not exactly sure. But you know that he started a business, in addition to being a college professor. He started a business, and the business did a lot of work for the Defense Department. Let's just leave it at that. So you're in your studio in Phoenix, and you get a call from the attorney that is your father, from your father's estate, and she explains to you that there's a foundation that your father's thinking about setting up, and that there are four trustees of this foundation: you, your sister, and the financial advisor for the foundation, and your stepmom. I should tell you that your mother passed away a few years ago. I'm sorry to tell you that. And your father remarried, and you've not had as much contact with your father during that period. Your sister's a professional athlete. She's a golfer. She played on the LPGA Tour for a while, and now she has a job as a golf pro at a high-end resort in Hawaii. Not a bad gig. So your father is late in life and not in good health, and I'm sorry to say that he died last year. And the attorney explains after the funeral that the estate is worth $10 million. Well, you had no idea that your father was doing that well. Turns out working with the military is actually not a bad arrangement. So you're kind of excited about this $10 million estate. You know, the yoga thing doesn't pay that well. But then the attorney goes on to say, every penny of this estate is going to go into this foundation that you heard of. Well, you were kind of excited about the $10 million at first. I mean, you had grief from your father's passing, but then the $10 million kind of got you excited a little bit. But all the money is going to go into the foundation, and you find out, are a trustee of this new foundation. So you go from grief to maybe a little disappointment to maybe some excitement, or at least some interest in that maybe the foundation might be fun as a trustee. It might be interesting, might be fulfilling in some way. And who knows? Maybe some of the grants from the foundation might be directed to projects of your interest. You're involved in some healthy living sorts of things in Phoenix, new age stuff maybe, and maybe some of the grants could go to the projects that you're interested in Phoenix. So the attorney calls again and says there'll be the first board meeting of the foundation. You fly into Bloomington, foundation pays your way. Coverage, but still. Foundation's nice to pay your way. And you attend the first meeting of the board in the attorney's office, and the first order of business is to elect the president of the foundation. And your father has identified that his widow should become the president, and that's voted and approved. And you're okay with that. You didn't really think about that. And that's not really a responsibility you wanted anyway, so I guess you're okay with that. And then the idea of the mission statement for the foundation comes up, and it turns out that the attorney reads a piece that your father had written, and it turns out that the mission for the foundation is to support advanced engineering research. Period. Well, what kind of engineering research? Well, it turns out the same exact research that your father was interested in, and you ask the attorney, excuse me, but is there any leeway here, any opportunity to, any flexibility in any of this at all? Turns out, no. It's a restricted gift from the estate. That's the mission statement. It's passed. Actually, later you can't remember if you voted for it or not, but it was just a fait accompli, right? And then there was a break for lunch. And after lunch you came back, and you noticed that your sister, who was on the phone from Hawaii, forgot to mention that she didn't show up. She was on the phone. It turns out that when you come back after lunch, that your sister's not on the phone. She doesn't come back to the meeting. There's some legal stuff discussed, some investment stuff, some of that other things that boards do. And I saw the look on your face that afternoon, because I was there. I saw the look on your face when you realized that your father had never really mentioned this foundation to you before he died. That your father, or that the foundation was going to be focused solely on something, a subject that you had no interest or no knowledge about. And that you had no ability to influence the future of this foundation. And 2 days later, you resigned your position as trustee of that foundation. And you found out later that your sister, calling in from Hawaii, resigned by email before lunch was over. So you see, trustee succession is a big challenge that family foundations face. In fact, most foundations, maybe more than 50%, don't have a plan in place at all to manage trustee succession. And it is the single largest issue identified by family foundations as their challenge. So why is that? Why do family foundations put off doing trustee succession? Well, some people identify fear as an issue. Fear of don't know how to do it, maybe. Also, maybe there's some family dynamics. My brother has a son, and I know my brother wants his son on the board, but he's a nincompoop. And I really don't want him on the board. And I don't want to face that problem, so I'll just put it off. And if I put it off, the longer I put it off, I don't have to deal with it. Sometimes sitting board members of family foundations don't want to give up their seat. Kind of having fun. I interviewed a board member of a foundation here locally that you would know, 72-year-old woman who said to me, I will give up my seat on the board when I die. My kids can take over. It's kind of fun to be a board member of a foundation sometimes. Sometimes sitting board members are concerned that the next generation is different. They get different ideas. Maybe they want to move the foundation in a different way. Maybe they want to manage it in a different way. In some ways, this is all procrastination, yes? But these are some of the issues, I think, that come up in that process. And sometimes they say, well, the next generation's busy. I've heard that. I was visiting a client recently in Louisiana. Well, they're busy. They're building careers. They're, one's in med school. They've got kids. They don't have time for the foundation. Maybe later when everything kind of simplifies in their life, maybe they have time for the foundation. So there are all sorts of reasons to avoid this process. But the fact is that successful foundations engage in success planning. This is something that the best foundations and the most successful foundations focus on. We encourage our clients to think about it as the family business, because it is a business, right? I mean, it's a nonprofit business, but it is a business. And it deserves to be treated with that sort of sense of responsibility. And sitting trustees have a legal and fiduciary responsibility to plan for the future success of the foundation. They have that responsibility because the fact that things are going well today doesn't mean that they're going to go well in the future. And if they engage in the planning that we encourage family foundations to do, it will help the next generation gain the capacity and the experience and the perspective that they need to take over these positions. So one of the things I was asked to talk about is the 5 rules for managing trustee succession. So we're going to do 3 things: talk about rules for managing trustee succession, talk about how to get the next generation involved, and since most of you are advisors in one way or another, talk about how you can manage that transition with your clients or your donors. So the first rule of managing trustee succession at a foundation is to start early. Nobody ever said, oh, I wish I'd started a lot later on this. No one ever said, oh, I'm glad I waited till Dad died before we started to work on this issue. Starting early is crucial. If you get the next generation involved, it's an opportunity for them to learn about the foundation and embrace the values and the traditions of the foundation. But if you wait until the last minute, you suddenly have trustees on the board who don't know anything about how the foundation's running. And one of the biggest problems in trustee succession is when the founders run it as their own personal entity and don't involve the children or the grandchildren, and then suddenly they're gone. And all the parents have taught the kids in that situation is, do whatever you want. So starting early is a fundamental key for us in working with family foundations. And if you involve the children early, they can share in the joy and the learning that a family foundation provides. If you treat it as just mom and dad's project, the children don't get the kind of fulfillment as well as the learning that they might get from being involved in the family foundation. And if the kids have no involvement or knowledge, what happens if they're suddenly at the board table? Well, they might fight. But sometimes they split the foundation up into pieces and go their separate ways, right? And there are a couple of examples of that in town that you might be familiar with. And the founders probably weren't interested in having that happen. So our second rule for trustee succession is commit to a thorough plan. A comprehensive plan is very important in managing trustee succession. This is not a 6-month plan or an 18-month plan. We encourage our clients to have an ongoing, evergreen plan. We've got a client right now we're working with, a family that the oldest child is 36 years old and the youngest grandchild, is 10 years old. Well, it's hard to treat that group, the grandchildren, as a group. You can't set up a program for the next set of trustees when you've got people between the ages of 35 and 10. So you need a much more sophisticated, comprehensive plan to treat that sort of range of ages. And this kind of plan, you should take into account the availability of resources. You probably don't want to have a plan for trustee succession that a $1 billion foundation would have if you're a $5 million foundation. You probably don't want to take the entire board and all the kids to Africa to look at some grant you gave in Africa if the whole cost of that trip would eat up your entire payout for the year. Okay? So make sure that you have a comprehensive and a thorough and an ongoing plan, but make sure that you're taking into account the availability of resources, both your time and your funds. So what are elements of such a plan? Well, how can you get the kids involved? We'll talk about that a little later, but clearly you can take them to philanthropy conferences. That's a good way to have a good component of a plan. You can encourage them to serve on nonprofit boards. You can have them attend board meetings. There are a lot of ways to get this next generation involved and have this as part of the plan. The third rule we have in working with trustee succession is balancing inclusion with performance. It's very common these days for family foundations to say, for the founder of a family foundation to say, I want all my kids involved, I want all my grandkids involved. I'm going to have them all on the board. The purpose of this foundation is to have all the whole family involved in a common philanthropic enterprise. And that is a wonderful thing. But not everybody has the interest or the skill to serve on the board of a family foundation. So there are plenty of ways, and we'll talk about them, there are plenty of ways to involve the family in the foundation without putting them on the board. As you involve the entire family in the activities of the foundation, it gives you an opportunity to identify those family members that are interested and have the ability to serve on the board. Inclusion is a good thing, but maybe you don't want to do it. You want to think about how many grandchildren there are, and if this is a perpetual foundation, and most of the foundations we work with are perpetual foundations. You want to think about how many grandkids there are, how many great-grandkids there are, how many great-great-grandkids there are. Founders who set up foundations and want everybody involved are really just thinking about their grandkids. They're not thinking about the cousins and the second cousins and the third cousins. The next rule we have for trustee succession management is developing guidelines for participation. It's very important that the members of the board understand what the expectations for their participation are. And this is the sort of thing that's important to share with children too, before they're identified or before they consider joining the board. And having a clear set of expectations sends the message to the whole family that this is serious business and deserves serious attention. You need job descriptions for board members. You need job descriptions for the officers of the board. It's very important that everybody understands what their responsibilities are. Because these sorts of things in family foundations, there can be sibling rivalries. Not in your family maybe, but in other things, right? And so having a clear set of expectations is very important to avoiding misunderstandings and rivalries. For example, board attendance, mandatory? Participate by phone? A lot of foundations haven't thought about that until somebody wants to call on a cell at the top of Mount Fuji and there's bad reception and you got to repeat things 3 times. How about grants to my personal interests? I'm going to cover travel costs for my spouse too, maybe, for the meetings. committee membership? Do I have to join committees? Is there compensation for board service? That's a big question people like to know about. Are there discretionary grants? Matching grants for my personal gifts, for example. So having a clear set of guidelines for participation on the board and letting that be known to the family, not just to the board members, but letting that be known to all family members is a very important aspect of managing trustee succession. One of the things that happens in this situation is that as soon as the G2, we know what G2, G3 means, yes? So as soon as the G2 generation joins the board, they are trying to think about how they get their kids on the board. That happens 5 minutes after they join the board. And if you have 2 children, and I have 8, I promise you we're going to have a problem. So our 5th rule of trustee succession is adopting a mission statement. You might not think that a mission statement is directly involved with succession, but I tell you, it is crucial to managing this process. I spoke a minute ago about the problem of founders treating it as their own foundation and not involving the kids, and later suddenly the kids are at the board. If there isn't a mission statement, a statement about the purpose of the foundation, anytime that transfer occurs, there are concerns, confusion, and potentially fights about what the purpose of this foundation is. So adopting a mission statement and making that clear to the sitting board and the whole family is crucial to managing the succession process. And really, if the foundation has an existing mission statement, that helps the next generation decide whether they want to join or not. You know, my yoga instructor story, which is a true story, by the way, that's an example of succession, trustee succession going horribly wrong. I think we would agree with that. But from a mission statement point of view, I would argue that that went very well. There was no ambiguity about the purpose of that foundation. In fact, there was so little ambiguity that the first board meeting wasn't a very happy one. But that was a successful use of a mission statement. The only better thing that would have happened is everybody known about that beforehand. Showing up at the first board meeting probably is not the best handling that. So our five rules for managing trustee succession: start early and have a plan, balance inclusion with performance, set guidelines for participation, and adopt a mission statement. So next, they've asked me to talk a little bit about how to prepare the next generation to serve as a trustee. So the first thing we encourage family foundations to do is capture the family's tradition in giving. Capture in writing the traditions, the charitable interests, and the traditions of the family charitable giving. It's important to capture the common charitable interests of the family to inform future generations. For example, some of you may know Peter Wege and the Wege Foundation, yes, out of Grand Rapids. So sadly, Mr. Wege died last year, maybe 2 years by now. But you know that Mr. Wege was a tireless advocate for clean water in the Great Lakes. He was just a beacon on this issue in our state. And the foundation will carry on its work. But 25 years from now, or 35 or 40 years from now, it will be very important for that next generation and the generation after that to know about the good work that Mr. Wege did. Not by rumor, not by oral tradition, but by capturing that in a written history about the family foundation. This is one of the most important things that can be done to prepare the next generation, because it informs the next generation about the family's tradition and history. And I tell you, those of you who are advisors, if you do this with your clients will love you. If you help capture their charitable interests and their history of giving and write that for them, they will kiss you on the mouth. Well, maybe. In a similar vein, we encourage, I got my slides in the wrong order. Let's see if I go back. All right, I talked about sense of family history and tradition, didn't I? So I'm sorry, I got the slides in the wrong order. So now I'll talk about the first bullet and try and resolve that little confusion. I apologize. So the next thing to do to involve the next generation is to give them experience in both grant making and governance. And the next time I mix the slide up, I want you to tell me and not let me die out here, okay? Okay, so it's very common for family foundations to encourage the next generation to engage in grant making. It's very common, as you probably know, to establish donor-advised funds for members of the family, for example, or put a little pool of money together for the children to come together and talk about how they might spend it. There are a lot of ways to get the next generation involved in grant making, and that is all really great stuff. And if you know 2164, for example, they're real leaders on the issue of how to get the next generation involved. So if you don't know the 2164 group, you should Google it. But a new board member needs not only experience in grant making, a new board member needs experience in governance as well. It's very important to get the next generation experiencing governance, as well as grant making. For example, a new board member needs to understand that when he or she comes into the boardroom, they take off their hat of individual interests and put on the hat of what's best for the foundation. Now, we've all learned that through the years in our serving on nonprofit boards and that sort of thing. But that's an important lesson, and there are many other lessons about governance, how to run a board meeting, that sort of thing, how to seek consensus, the proper role of a board chair versus a board member. These are important lessons, and it's important for family members to learn as you consider them for a position on the trustees. Okay, we'll see what's next here. Who knows? We'll just pop up something randomly. Adopt family values and incorporate them into the work of the foundation. Just like it's important to capture the history and the interests of the family, it's equally important to capture the family's charitable values. The interests and values are different. The family might have an interest in the homelessness problem in Detroit, say. That's different than a value which might be respect and dignity for all people. Our foundation has a value of making sure that we treat everyone we work with respect and dignity that they deserve, both our grantees, our staff, our colleagues, and the participants in the programs that we support. Capturing the values of the family, very important for the long-term stability of the foundation. Everybody's got their own interests, everybody's got their own values, but capturing the values of the family, very important. And as you work with your clients to capture that history and tradition, ask them about values too, because they will also be thrilled, maybe another kiss, they'll also be thrilled at having the values of the family captured. And this is a great way to pass on not only the traditions, but the values of the family to the next generation, whether they join the board or not. Encourage individual philanthropy. One of the best ways to get the next generation involved is encourage young people of all ages, to engage in their own individual philanthropy, separate from the foundation. By volunteering, by making gifts, by serving on committees or on the board of nonprofits, individual members of the family can gain an enormous amount of experience and knowledge about the nonprofit sector. It can also help them decide whether they want to be on a board or not, on the board of the trustees or not. And it can help you decide whether they appear to be the type of person that you think would be a good board member. And when they do join the board, they will bring a wealth of experience. Not just the fact that they're a grandchild of the founder, but they'll bring a wealth of experience about being involved in the nonprofit community. and seeing how some gifts go well and some gifts don't, and some nonprofits make promises that they keep and sometimes they don't. They'll learn about how you've got a strong leader in a nonprofit and that leader leaves. Sometimes the institution struggles. There's a lot of wisdom that can be learned by encouraging the family members to engage in individual philanthropy. Our next suggestion for preparing the next generation, is involving all members of the family in the activities of the foundation. There are many, many ways for the family to participate, not on the board. All sorts of ways for the family to participate on committees, say, if they're young people, and we talked about how you might have a youth board that does some grant making. They can participate on site visits. There's all sorts of ways for the family to be involved and get some of the learning and the fulfillment that comes from being part of the family that has this foundation. And the board is hard work and has some responsibility. There are all sorts of ways to involve the rest of the family in ways that they can enjoy and take fulfillment and learning from the work of the foundation. And it also positions them better to join the board if and when that happens. We worked with a family a few years ago that had a family foundation newsletter only for the family. So at this point they were maybe G4, G5 running the board, so it was a pretty broad group. But they had a family foundation newsletter that just went to members of the family to communicate what the foundation was up to, what the goals, what the mission, what the goals, what the values, and what the grants and activities were, and offering opportunities for family members to participate in things. This is a really wonderful way to communicate what the foundation's up to, so that when people join the board, they're already well informed about the activities of the foundation, yes? It's also a great way to reduce disappointment, rivalry, friction, that sort of thing that can happen in a foundation when you're down a couple generations and your brother's on the board with his 2 kids and you're not, and you feel like you're shut out. And those things happen. So having that communication and involving people and inviting them to meetings and all is a lovely way to sort of make the tent a little bigger and include more folks. Okay, so lastly, I was asked to talk a little bit about how you folks can work with the foundation in transition. So most of you have the opportunity to work directly or indirectly with family foundations that might be in some sort of succession plan. The most important thing I can say that you can do, and maybe I'm speaking to the development professionals more in this case, is help them anticipate these issues that we talked about today and encourage them to think about the planning to avoid what future problems might be down the road. Now, you might say, I don't have that kind of relationship with my donor. It's not my place to tell them what to do. But you don't have to actually give them the lecture I just did. You should do this, you should do this, you should do this. You don't have to do that. There's plenty of things out there, and I'll pop them up on the screen in a minute, that have been written about this issue. And it's easy for you to say, here, there might be something, I saw this the other day, this might be something you'd be interested in. I see this as something that family foundations are talking about today. This might be of interest. You can play a very important role there in helping the families anticipate these problems and encouraging them to plan to avoid problems in the future. The next suggestion I have, if you're working with family foundations that are going through a trustee succession process, is to be patient. This can take a lot. A death might have been involved. There might be some fighting going on behind the scenes. There might be a lawsuit. That happens. So the fact that they're not returning your calls, the fact that they're not answering your letters, don't take it personal. It's not about you. They're trying to figure out what's going on. So I encourage you to be patient during this process and not panic. Understand that it's a private family matter and let the process unfold as it should. And as a development person, there's not much of an opportunity for you to engage in that. If you're an attorney, of course, that's a whole different story. You might be knee-deep. You might be knee-deep in it. So have patience. I think we can all identify transitions that have happened at foundations here in the last couple of years where maybe there wasn't a peep out of the foundation in 18 months. It's not that they don't care. They're busy. And if a death was involved, they're busy with the family business. They're busy with the estate. There could be all sorts of issues about stock and valuation and sale of assets and all that sort of thing. So it's not that they don't care. It's just that they're not ready to talk. And one thing you can do is, and I know none of you would do this, is not complain about this at the time. Because I've heard plenty of development officers come to me and say, you know, that so-and-so foundation won't answer my calls, and they won't answer my letters, and I've been calling them, and it's not about you. They're having a tough time right now. Have some patience and understand that it's not, don't take it personally. You've all seen that situation, yeah? So one thing you can do during this succession, this transition process, is keep everybody informed. And by everybody, I mean the full board and maybe the family as well. Informed about the work of your nonprofit. Again, speaking to development folks. Is that if you have a good relationship with the president of the board chair, and that person's suddenly gone, and the next person who replaces him or her is the cousin from Seattle, that might not be the best thing if they've never heard about you. So, to the extent that you can, keep the full board aware of the work of your nonprofit. Always, or at least during times of transition. It positions you better for when the transition's complete, and you can then have an interaction, have a communication with the new board that's now in place. And I can cite a number of important examples here in Michigan in the last few years where there was a new president, a new board chair, and there were long-time relationships with nonprofits, and the new board chair never heard of it. Didn't know anything about it. And the development officer would say to me, I had such a great relationship with Mr. X. We worked together. He was just in our office 6 months ago. We took him on a tour. Well, Mr. X is gone. So develop that relationship with the whole family if you can. You've got to find that in a comfortable way, right? You don't want to send them the accounting for your last grant, a 3-page budget with how you spent the money. That's probably a little much. But tell him about what you're doing at your organization. Tell him about your plans for the future. Tell him if you've got some exciting news, you opened a new building or launched a new program or hired a new executive or something. Keeping them informed about your organization is a really great long-term strategy. Oh, so I come to the end of the talk. I just want to say we think this is a really important issue, trustee succession. We think that people should engage in the planning effort early, and we think that the next generation should be involved as early and as much as possible. And you folks development officers, professional advisors, that sort of thing. You can play a really big role in this process because you have a relationship with these folks. Sometimes you're a little hesitant maybe to bring these bigger issues up, but you can have a really helpful role in encouraging them to plan because you've seen situations where foundations blew up. Remember, you were a yoga instructor and you lived through that. So you've seen situations that didn't go well, so you can be helpful to your clients or your donors by encouraging them to plan. So, thank you very much. I want to share with you, some resources. These slides are on the web, so you can pull them down, so I wouldn't mean that you'd want to copy them down now, but the National Center for Family Philanthropy is a huge resource for these issues, and if you're not familiar with the National Center, we're doing a webinar next week on how families can work with community foundations that I'm participating in, so if you want to hear me some more, you can sign up for that. The Exponent Philanthropy, the Association of Small, used to be the Association of Small Foundations, is a really good resource too. And the Council of Michigan Foundations, of course, very good source of information. So here's a little bit about us. Happy to have you join our blog and that sort of thing. And we do have a publication about what we call a founder's guide of why family foundations lose their way, how to start a foundation. If you'd be interested in this, it's a really helpful guide to new founders for foundations. If you give us your business card, we'd be happy to send you a copy of this.
Mark,
Yes,
I have a question.
sure.
From a fundraiser's perspective, have you worked with a team approach where the fundraiser is involved with the financial advisor or any other team members that would be helping the family foundation? Have you ever done that before?
I've not seen that happen, no. No.
So the reason I ask is that, and I have this particular situation, it's a family foundation, and I have developed a relationship with a financial advisor. And so now I'm totally in that loop, and we are talking all the time. And it seems to be a very good thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, what you're doing is, what the best fundraisers do is advise the donor on what's best for the donor.
Right.
And you are engaging in some philanthropy advising to them, what's best meets their needs and what kind of giving would best meet their goals. So that's a wonderful thing. And
I mean, it's kind of hard to do sometimes, but I feel like when you make that breakthrough as a fundraiser, it's like really golden.
yeah, I bet.
So I just wondered.
Yep.
Mark, could you touch a little more on compensation, how frequently you see in amounts?
For board members.
Sizable amount?
Yeah. So, should a family foundation pay its board or not? And this is an issue debated for years. There's no right answer, no good answer. Sometimes the founder felt that was a good thing. Sometimes the founder prohibited against it. I would say our clients are maybe 50-50 on that. You all probably know better than I do that the IRS looks at that hard because they want to make sure that the compensation is appropriate. And so a board would certainly want to review that every year and benchmark it with appropriate comps to show that it's at an appropriate level. It's illegal or at least wrong to use that as a way to pay off a nephew who doesn't have a job. You got to pay them for real work. So I think a lot of it has to do with how much work you expect of the board. If you're going to a couple meetings every year and approving some grants, and you've got a lot of good staffing in place, maybe through you have hired staff, or you've got consultants, or a bank or law office is doing a lot of that work, maybe compensation is inappropriate. But if board members are visiting nonprofits and going on site visits and meeting with them on a regular basis, maybe compensation is appropriate in that situation. So
similar question in another session. Is there a threshold for when family foundation becomes a good idea? The founder obviously has created some wealth for himself or herself, and now as a family, some of this is just managed by a good estate attorney sometimes in terms of the wealth and estate planning for heirs. What motivates this? Is it a dollar level that says we need to do this, or is it
So that,
profit purely?
sure, so people often say, and I'm sure you've heard this before, what's the cutoff between a donor advised fund and a private foundation, family foundation? And you'll hear different answers, 5 million, 10 million, that sort of thing. Personally, I think that's the wrong question.
Okay.
Personally, I think the question is, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? Because a family foundation may be appropriate if your goal, even when it's small,
Right.
given your goals.
Okay.
But, we've got experiences around the country of $100 million donor advised funds, right? And Randy at the Community Foundation will tell you all about that. So, donor advised funds, I have a donor advised fund at the Community Foundation. They're a wonderful thing. But I tell advisors to think not about the amount of money, but the goal. If you're going to write 2 checks a year, one to your alma mater and one to your church, you don't need a private foundation. If you want to show up in Africa and present a check to some poverty program, that's probably something that'd be more easily done through your family foundation. If you want to build a new wing on the law library at Yale and have it named after you, and you want to be there and have your picture taken and go out to dinner with the president, that might be a little easier with your private foundation. Although I know the donor advised funds will do that. So
We built a chemistry building on Main State.
there you go. That's right.
Way to go, Reed.
So I think the question is, what's the goal? And also, most of our clients have family foundations and donor advised funds. So if you're thinking about either or, I think you're 10 years late. I think you want to presume that your family, your clients, will have both a family foundation and a donor advised fund. And so for your advancement folks, I wouldn't think about how do I get to the family foundation. I get to the family and let the family decide how they want to make a gift. And they might well make a gift from 2 or 3 different pots. So I would, yeah.
Mark, I think there's a perception that family foundations are a little bit more agile and adaptive to the market and be able to make decisions quicker and such. Are you finding with the Gen 2 folks in particular, on these family foundations are coming with not donor advised funds, but program-related investments, some of the new language things, venture capital, just different ways to spend their corpus other than the standard 5% giveaway? Is that a trend that you're seeing?
Well,
There's a lot of questions.
well, there are 2 pieces to that. Do I think family foundations are more agile? I'm not sure they are. I mean, some of them move like glaciers. It depends on the decision-making process. If you're going to get the whole family together and they only get together twice a year, but if there's one decision maker and that person can make a decision at the moment, then that's a different story. So, but in terms of PRIs, impact investing, that sort of thing, I don't see a lot of family foundations interested in our work. Clearly, you can find a lot of really innovative family foundations out there that are doing some of that. I think a lot of the interest in that impact investing field comes from professionally staffed foundations that have professionals who are interested in innovative ways to really have an impact and use the assets as well as the grant. I think that's a lot of the driving force for impact investing. But there are really important exceptions out there about families that are leading the way. I think in California, for example, you see a lot of the Silicon Valley philanthropists are very involved in all sorts of advanced, innovative kind of stuff. And you know, Phil Fisher locally is a leader on this, so they're really important examples. But I think if you just went out and looked at your garden variety family foundation, I would say those that are largely on staff, I would say they're not focused so much on impact investing. That's my experience. How are we doing in time?
One more question.
One more question. Oh, sorry. Hi, Jane.
Hi. From the development office's standpoint, representing an attraction, let's say, that holds a lot of interest for people. We will sometimes see people who say, my dad gave you a lot of money back in the day, so we want free stuff. I'd like a tour, I'd like a free ticket to your party, all that kind of thing. Any suggestions on tactfully handling a second generation who's trying to ride their parents' coattails?
Who do you represent, and can I get free tickets?
So did you all hear the question is, what about a second or third generation family member who comes to the nonprofit and says, my folks, my grandfolks gave you a lot of money, so I want tickets to this or private tour or something. I've never heard of that, I gotta say, but I'm not in your shoes. Well, that just sort of harkens back to this discussion about good nonprofit governance and all that we had earlier today. If that person had learned about good nonprofit governance and may not have engaged in that sort of thing. I don't have a lot of good advice. That doesn't strike me as something that's very palatable.
Jane, I might suggest you go back to the family values of the donors in terms of wanting to help a nonprofit. And we're trying to honor that legacy by being shrewd stewards of their resources and whoever gave the money, this is counted with them and try to change the conversation. That in the end, we're not convinced that at least you represent the donor.
Yeah. It could just be a little uncomfortable to sort of, however kind you do it, lecture a grandson that, your granddad would be horrified that we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
I'd ask some questions.
Yeah.
Time for one more question? So I'm working with some donors that I think would fall into the category of second gen, but there is not a family foundation. I've seen it a number of times. How do you begin the conversation of sort of almost getting to what Jane was saying, but what are your family's interests in philanthropy when there is not a stated mission statement or set of goals, and I don't really know if they're thinking in that way. How do you start that conversation, which would help move them from buying, a table at an event to really being philanthropic?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. I think given the expertise in this room, and I know you've got a lot of experience too, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question. I'm not in that role. I'm usually we are, and I want to introduce Ron DeSico here, who's managing director of the firm and can answer any questions or correct any mistakes I made during my talk. We're working with folks who know what they want to do, and we help them do it, or we help them figure out exactly how to do it. So I don't know, I guess.
Send them to you.
Yeah, send them to me, and I'll clear it up.
Mark, thank you so much. On behalf of the Plan Meeting Roundtable and Legal Legacy, we would like to present you with a little token of our appreciation, which is a gift you can make to any of your favorite charities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so lunch is next. I know I'm hungry. And it is back in room 500, the big room. And so there's plenty of time for networking and talking and getting to know each other. And we'll see you back in the afternoon sessions.